Welcome to Star Wars Timeline. In today's review, I'm discussing the first of the new Thrawn books by the same author responsible for the legendary original Thrawn trilogies, Timothy Zahn. Let's find out if this novel honors the past or if it's a Disney-fied play on nostalgia. Stick around and find out. Where should I start reading? What is canon versus legends? When does the story begin? The answers to these questions is right here on Star Wars Timeline. Thrawn is the first book of the new series by the same author, Timothy Zahn. It's released in April of 2017 with cover illustration by Scott Biel. I looked at this on the shelves and the illustration recaptured Thrawn's character so much that I instantly was hyped, and I was wondering whether this book is going to do the justice to the originals from the early 90s. Well, this is what the video is all about, and we're going to find out here. The storyline here takes place 13 years before Battle of Yavin or before BBY, leading up to 2 years before Battle of Yavin, which is the original episode 4. Before we jump into discussing the story of this book and me giving you my opinion, and by the way, it's going to be a full spoiler on review, I wanted to make a small distinction here. The original Thrawn trilogy in the early 90s, Timothy Zahn, same author, they take place much later into the story than this book. This actually serves as a prequel, not to be confused. The original books are considered legend series, something that Disney kind of like put in the shelf since 2015 and said, okay, here is Legends, and we're going to start with new canon here. This new book is obviously part of the new canon. But once again, before we start doing the review, I wanted to point out that both works work equally well. You know, you shouldn't disregard this or the old material just because one is Legends and one is canon. I feel that both will only enhance your experience with Thrawn. All right, let's get into the synopsis. And once again, this is your spoiler warning. This is a full spoiler on review. I highly recommend you read the book first. We start off in this wild space, an unknown planet, and there's a scouting party of Imperials who are being overrun by these attackers. We find out that it's only just one alien from a species called Chiss. And there's a cadet among the Imperials, Eli Vanto, who is able to serve as a translator. So they capture the alien, they bring him before the Emperor. And it turns out that this young and capable man is actually quite a strategic mind. He's very cunning, very smart. Mithran Nuriodo, that's his full name. He introduces himself as Thrawn, and he warns the Emperor of some hidden menace, some enemy, some danger coming from the wild space, and that was the reason for him to come into this part of the galaxy. One of the Imperials, Wolf Yularen, who you might remember from the Clone Wars series, he is responsible for situating Thrawn, and he actually attaches the young translator cadet Eli Vanto and assigns both of them into the Imperial Academy. On the other hand, we have a different character. We have Arinda Price, also a character you might remember from Star Wars Clone Wars, who is the governor of Lothal. Well, in this book, she's much younger, and she oversees her parents' mining company on Lothal when suddenly the Empire takes over, they dismantle her own business, and now she's a very ambitious young woman who travels to Coruscant to advance her career. Now we're back to Thrawn, which the book basically keeps going before these two major characters. We see his quick advance to power through his cunning, through his strategic mind and intelligence, and, you know, understanding warfare like nobody seems to in Empire's ranks. And we actually see him in this novel get a command of his signature Star Destroyer Chimera. Again, cutting back to Price, she also travels to Coruscant, she rises among the political elite, and she gains some really, really influential friends, and eventually starts working with Tarkin. She basically gets into a situation where she needs to somebody to look behind her back, and she enlists Thrawn to be her ally. She says, look, you don't understand the politics of the Empire, I don't understand the warfare aspect of it, but together as a team, we could work. So this is the synopsis in a nutshell. It basically serves as a foundation of establishing Thrawn in this new canon. And now to get into the my impression of the book and discussing what I thought of it. And I want to begin actually right with what I said before. This book is neither an origin story nor is it this epic scale tour de force actioner like we saw with the original Thrawn books in the early 90s. Why? Because when the early Star Wars books were written, and especially Thrawn, yes, there were a couple of titles here and there, but the lore was vastly unexplored. And Timothy Zahn had free reign to create all these characters, to take them in any direction he wanted, and basically reinvent everything from scratch. Lucas gave him full go. Here, obviously, we have 40-year rich history of Star Wars Legends books. We have the new material, and the Lucasfilm Story Group is trying to, lead everything in a very organized manner. So, the events in one book affect the other, and so forth. So it's understandable that this novel is constrained, and this is not necessarily my criticism of it. It's just we need to understand that Timothy Zahn is now working with other talented writers. And this first novel was, first of all, it's a miracle that it happened. They brought him back into the new canon, and the author is able to write new material. But he needed to situate himself. He needed to understand, like, look, okay, I can't do just brush strokes, wide brush strokes, and do whatever the heck I want. No, I need to start with his story and eventually grow Thrawn as a character and weave him effortlessly into what's going on, in TV shows and animated series and so forth. Next, as I mentioned before, this is not a sweeping epic actioner. In fact, there are some action sequences described here in terms of like aerial space battle and the opening ground battle that takes place on the surface of the planet where Thrawn is being discovered and captured. But it reads more as a military thriller. For people who are looking for like crazy action and a lot of set pieces, you might not necessarily find it here. It's a more of a cerebral book, and it's meant to establish Thrawn and put him on this chessboard and say like he's going to be an important player later on. And what's really interesting, it has all the pedigree of that military thriller that it requires to be interesting. If you don't have action, then what do you need? It has solid writing. It has, I believe, a great cast of characters which were interesting to follow, and you see them grow through the novel, like Thrawn, especially Eli Vanto, the Governor Price from Lothal. And we see Thrawn's coming to power. We see him getting these full reins, understanding how the Empire operates, and later, provides as a platform for future books potentially, which I haven't read any of the new books. There are other new canon Thrawn novels, but this one provides the platform to say, like, look, he's going to become a force of nature, and he's going to be one of the most prominent characters because fans love him. Old fans from the EU, new canon fans of people who watch shows like Rebels, people adore Thrawn, and it's an interesting setup in this book. Another thing I wanted to mention is that many science fiction novels, other media like video games, have an interesting tactic, a strategy to illustrate a character from a different perspective. For example, Hideo Kojima. The first couple of Metal Gear Solid games took a perspective from its main protagonist, Solid Snake. Well, in Solid Snake 2 on PlayStation 2, we are taking control of this other character, who basically, Raiden, who we see Snake and his legend through the eyes of the secondary character. And same, I believe, happens here. The invention of Eli Vanto is amazingly effective. In the original old school Thrawn trilogy, we had this Captain Pelayan, who also rises up in ranks. He later becomes an admiral and even a Moff. But in the trilogy, he serves as Thrawn's aide. And there's a lot of scenes that we view upon Thrawn from his angle, his perspective. Same is true with this character, Eli Vanto. I almost imagine he's a version of the younger Pelayan from the originals. And I think it works really effectively. It kind of gives you that mystical aura and the grandeur to the Chiss species, which we don't know a lot about in this new canon. And also, they're not known to the people that populate this universe. Like, oh my God, who are these Chiss characters? So I thought Eli Vanto was quite effective. And once again, this is a novel that works best because of its characters. If you wouldn't have Arinda Price, the governor of Lothal, if you wouldn't have Tarkin, if you wouldn't have Eli Vanta, and other minor characters like who represent this corrupt empire that they're all vying for power and they're bickering among each other and they're ready to stab each other in the back, I don't think this novel would have worked otherwise. And, you know, the argument comes, well, it's a Star Wars novel, it needs to have action. I don't believe so. I think Star Wars books in particular can explore different some genres, and not each one needs to have full-blown action. And it works perfectly here because a military thriller, and we see this military figure, and this is the biggest identity trait of Thrawn. He's a strategist. He's not a person who will jump head on and fist fight you or just commit all of his troops and try to overpower you when you're with Imperial assets. He's a strategist. He's a chess player. He uses his mind. And the book tackles that effortlessly. And another thing I wanted to mention, this book foreshadows something big. Once again, I have not read future novels, and, you know, the new canon of Star Wars books has only just begun. You know, we see something like High Republic, which, even though it takes place a couple of hundred years before this novel, we'll already see the, what do you call them, the Nile, these space marauders. And something in this book that Thrawn mentions, the entire setup, the premise of this novel is for Thrawn to travel and see the Emperor face to face and warn him on something. He said, look, there's a danger greater than this rebellion that you have on your hands that could both affect my people who are in the wild space, the Chits, and it could affect your empire. So we better work together. We better get our game on because this threat is imminent and it's coming. And it made me so excited to push through this book and you know, get to the other stuff. I'm like, oh my God, what could it possibly be? Awesome setup, and I can't wait to see where the future books go. So anyway, guys, I think this novel needed to fulfill a certain task. It needed to reestablish Thrawn's character and reintroduce him to the old fans, and also have the chance for the newcomers to the EU to acquaint themselves with him and say, oh, well, what is he all about, before we see him, how he starts influencing the Empire. And on that front, the book succeeds excellently. To think of any shortcomings, I can't think of a lot. Before each chapter, there's kind of like an Art of War Sun Tzu treatise or analyses that Thrawn does, and he discusses the art of war, the strategy of war, what needs to do. I felt it didn't need to be there for each and every chapter, but it's so short, it didn't detract from the main reading in any way. I just felt that the first chapter perhaps would suffice. You know, it would be like a quick introduction, how the Thrawn's mind operates, and that would be enough. That's the only nitpick. In terms of score, 3.5, easy for me. It's not a full 4 amazing score, just because of its scope. And once I said, you know, I said it early in this review, it's not necessarily a detriment to the book. It's not a negative. It's just smaller in scope. You know, yes, it potentially could have been something bigger, and Lucasfilm and Disney could have given Timothy Zahn free reign, because based on his reputation, you know, Star Wars readers adore him all over the place. But I felt it worked. So 3.5, I think, is just a score for this book. Anyway, let me guys know what you thought of it, and I would particularly like to read in a comment section below for those of you who read the original trilogy, and how do you stack up this one novel? You know, my knowledge is limited because I haven't read any future books. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. My name is Ben. I do Star Wars comic book reviews, character highlights, lore videos, stuff like that. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel, hit that bell button. I appreciate your support very much. See you next time.